The man standing on my porch was polite about it. He took his hat off, checked the numbers beside my door to be sure he had the right house, and then he told me that if I did not pay a certain amount of money by the 12th of June, a judge was going to give my place to somebody I had never met. I asked him to say that again, and he did, word for word, because that is his job. My name is Wendell Prather. I am 78 years old, and I live 11 miles outside a town called Ellery in Pettibone County, Illinois, on 11 acres. Rosalie and I bought in 1979 and paid off to the last dollar. In the spring of 1988, I remember the day we paid it off. Rosalie made a chocolate cake for supper, and neither one of us said much, because there was not much that needed saying. One thing first, and it is not money, and it is not a favor. Somewhere in the room you are sitting in right now, or one room over, there is something older than this story that still works. A box fan, a percolator, a drill with a cloth cord, a lamp that was your mother's, a radio that only gets one station but gets it clean. Put it down in the comments. What it is and how old. Best you can figure. I would like to know what is still running tonight in all those houses I will never see. I am asking for a reason, and it will make sense before we are done. Now, my trade, because everything that happened to me happened for one reason, and the reason is something I knew for 41 years and forgot for 3. I was a lineman. I hired on with Prairie Line Electric Cooperative in the spring of 1970, 22 years old. And I climbed poles and hung wire and set transformers and dug out ice storms in the dark for 41 years. And I retired in 2011 with a good back, which is more than most of us got. Here is the first thing they teach you, and they teach it before they teach you how to climb. A dead wire and a live wire look exactly the same. There is no color to it. There is no sound. A line that has been de-energized and grounded, and a line carrying 7,200 volts hang there in the same gray sky, looking like two pieces of the same rope. You cannot tell by looking. You cannot tell by asking. You cannot tell because a man you have known 30 years stands on the ground and calls up to you that it is clear. You test it. You put a meter on it, or you put a hot stick on it, and you find out for yourself every single time, on every single wire, including the one you tested an hour ago. And then you ground it, and then you touch it. Webb Bexley was my foreman for 19 of those years, and Webb had a way of saying it that I have never improved on. He would say, you test it, or you take somebody's word for it. Only one of those has ever put a man in the ground. Hold on to that. I did not. There is a canvas bag that lives on the shelf inside my back door. It has lived on some shelf inside some door of mine since 1971. Inside it is a pair of rubber gloves, class 2, yellow going orange with age, and a pair of leather protectors to go over them. Every 90 days of my working life, those gloves went off in a box to a testing lab in Decatur. And every 90 days they came back with a date stamped inside the cuff, and I looked at that date before I put them on. Not the year, the date. I am 15 years retired, and I still send them. 4 times a year a box to Decatur, $26 and change. And back they come with a fresh date inside the cuff, and I write that date down in a spiral notebook in the drawer under the telephone. Rosalie used to watch me do it from the kitchen doorway and say, Wendell, who exactly are you planning to electrocute? And I would say, nobody, and that is the point. That notebook is going to matter later. So is that date. The deputy on my porch that morning was named Arlo Wenninger, and he could not have been 35 years old. It was the 17th of February, and there was old snow in the fence rows, and he stood there with his hat in his hand, in the cold, and read me a paper called a take notice, which is a thing the law makes somebody hand you in person when your ground has been sold out from under you for taxes. He read that my property had been sold at the county's annual tax sale. He read that a company had bought the taxes and held a certificate. He read that the period in which I could redeem would expire on the 12th of June, and he read that a petition had been filed asking the circuit court for a tax deed which would transfer title and the right of possession, and that the matter was set for hearing. I stood in my own doorway in my sock feet, and I heard all of it, and none of it. I said, Son, there is a mistake in this. I do not owe anybody. I have never in my life missed a payment on anything. He said, Yes, sir. He said, I am required to hand it to whoever is in possession of the property. That is all I am doing. He said, Whether it is right or wrong is not something I get to decide out here on your porch, and I would not want you to think I was saying it was right. I have thought about that young man a great deal since. He did not have to say that last part. Then came the one sentence that cracked it all open. He said, "Mr. Prather, the address on my paper for the owner of record is not this address." He turned the sheet around and held it out and let me read it, which he also did not have to do. The owner was me, Wendell J. Prather. The address under my name was 118 North Kestrel Street, Suite 2, Vandiver, Illinois. I have never in my life received mail at 118 North Kestrel Street, but I knew whose office it was. I had sat in the chair in front of that desk. I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner across a table from the man whose name is on the glass. The county seat is Vandiver, 22 miles north on a road that follows the old rail bed, and I was in the truck before the deputy's car was out of my lane. The county collector keeps a counter on the first floor of the courthouse with a marble top worn into a shallow dish in front of the window where 4 generations of Pettibone County have set their elbows. The woman behind that window is named Wendell Chastain. She has worked that counter 31 years. She was there when I paid my taxes in person every year, from 1979 until 3 years ago, back when a man paid his taxes the way he got his hair cut, in town, on a Saturday, with a receipt. She read the take notice, then looked up at me past her glasses, and she did not say one comforting thing, which I have come to appreciate more than I can tell you. She said, "Let me pull the parcel." She typed. She has a way of typing where her whole hand comes down at once. Then she turned the screen partway around, which I found out later she is not supposed to do, and walked me down it line by line the way you would walk a man down a ladder. Illinois taxes are paid a year behind, and they come in 2 installments, June and September. The June installment on my place had been paid for 2 years running. The September installment had not been paid either year. Not late, not partial, not paid. And when a parcel goes delinquent in this state, the county does not come, take your house. It does something that sounds like nothing at all, which I am going to let Wendell Chastain explain to you herself in a little while, because she explains it better than I ever will, and because I did not understand one word of it that morning. She read me the numbers off the screen in the flat voice of a woman who has read them to a great many people. The 2 September installments came to $1,140. That was what my land had sold for at the annual sale in November. $1,140 against a place the township assessor carries at $190,000. Buyer of record, Meridian Ledger Limited Liability Company, Springfield. Redemption expires the 12th of June. Amount to redeem, as of that morning, $3,460.11. I put both hands flat on that marble counter. I said, "Wendell, I want you to understand something. I have never let a bill sit. Not once. Not in 59 years of paying bills." And she said, "I know it, Wendell. I know it because I used to take your money." Then she said, "Look here." And she moved her finger to the top of the screen where the mailing address sits. 118 North Kestrel Street, Suite 2, she said. The bills went there. Both installments, both years, and the delinquency notice, and the certified letter, and the publication went in the paper the way it does, in the list, in agate type, in the back, where nobody has read anything since 1950. I stood there, and I did the arithmetic that everybody does eventually, and it does not take long, and it does not feel good. 3 years ago, 4 months after we buried Rosalie, my daughter Deanna and her husband drove out on a Sunday afternoon. Dee is 51, and she is a school nurse, and she has her mother's hands. Her husband is named Garrett Vossler. He is 48, and he is a licensed real estate appraiser, with an office on the square in Vandiver, and a truck that is always clean. They sat at my kitchen table, and Dee cried some, and Garrett was kind about it, and what he said was, "When you have got enough to carry, let us take the paperwork off your hands." He said the mail out here gets buried under the catalogs. He said his office runs everything through one system: taxes, insurance, the co-op bill. He said, "We will just have the county send it to me, and I will pay it out of your account, and you will never have to think about it again." And I sat in my own kitchen, 75 years old, 4 months a widower, with a box of her reading glasses still on the counter because I could not make myself decide what to do with them. And I said, "All right." I did not test it. 41 years, 4 times a year, $26 and change to a lab in Decatur so I could look at a date stamped inside a cuff. And when it came to the ground my wife is buried a half mile from, I stood on the ground and took a man's word. That is the whole story right there. Everything after this is just the county doing what the county does. Ivadel watched me get to the bottom of it. Then she said, Wendell, that address did not change itself. Somebody filed a form. I said, in this office. She said, in this office. We keep every one of them. Paper copy in the parcel file. And a scan. She said, they have got a date stamp on them. To the minute. She said it the way a woman says a thing she is proud of and is not allowed to be proud of out loud. She said, do you want me to pull it? And I stood there a long time, longer than was comfortable for either of us, with the marble under my hands. And I said, not yet, because I was going to go ask him myself, face to face, in his office, like a man. I still thought there was a chance that the answer was going to be a bookkeeper and a computer and an apology. I have heard men tell these stories like they knew from the first minute. I did not know. I drove 22 miles back south with that take notice on the seat beside me, and part of me was already working out how I would tell him it was all right. Vossler Appraisal Services has the second floor above what used to be the shoe store on the north side of the square. There is a brass plate by the stairs, and there are 11 stairs, and I counted them going up because I needed something to count. Garrett came around the desk with his hand out before I had the door all the way open. He is a big, pleasant man, and he has never once been anything but pleasant to me. I put the take notice on his desk blotter, and I said, Garrett, a deputy brought me this at 8 o'clock this morning. He read it. I watched his face while he read it, and what I saw was not surprise. I want to be careful here, because a man can talk himself into having seen anything. But I have watched a lot of faces in the second before a man tells me the line is clear. What I saw was a man reading something he had read before. And then, he was very sorry. He said the county had gone to a new system in the spring. He said the second installment bill has a different stub than the first, and there was a stretch where his office was posting them wrong. He said, this is on me, Wen. This is absolutely on me, and I have been fighting with them about it since December. Since December. I had been served in February. He had known since December, and I had heard nothing. I said, what does it take to fix it? And he said, well, that is the thing, and he opened his side drawer. He came out with a folder and 2 documents in it, and he had them turned around to face me already, which I noticed. The first was a quitclaim deed, conveying my 11 acres and everything on it to Garrett Vossler. The second was a power of attorney. He talked while I looked at them, and I will give him this. It was a good speech. He said, the tax buyer will not deal with an individual, he deals with entities. This is what I do all day. He said, sign these and I will have it cleared inside a week, and I will deed it right back to you the same afternoon, he said. And honestly, when, at your age, out there alone, it is not a bad thing to have your name off a piece of dirt for a few days. I said, at my age, and he said, you know what I mean. I did know what he meant. I have known what people mean by that since I turned 70. I said I would sleep on it. I said I do not sign anything the same day I read it, which is true and has been true since 1974. He said that was smart. He said, take all the time you need. And then he said, well, not all of it. And he laughed, and I laughed too. And that is the part I am least proud of. Here is what I saw on my way out. His desk is the kind with a glass top over it and papers slid underneath. Under the glass, at the corner, half under a coffee cup, was a card with a number printed on it in heavy black. Bidder card. Pettibone County Annual Tax Sale. And a name in the blank. Not Garrett Vossler. Meridian Ledger Limited Liability Company. I did not stop walking. I have been in a lot of situations where the only correct thing to do is keep your hands still and finish going down the ladder, and this was one of them. I said something about the weather at the door. I got in my truck. I sat in a parking space on the square in Vandiver, Illinois, for 11 minutes without starting the engine, because a man's tax bill going unpaid is a failure. A man sitting in the room where his own tax bill is being bought is something else, and it has a different name, and I was 78 years old and did not want to say it out loud in a parking space. I went home the long way, past the Prairie Line Yard where I hired on in 1970. There are 2 poles standing behind the fence there that are not connected to anything. They keep them for training. A new man goes up one and comes down and goes up the other, and one of them is dead and one of them is dead, and he does not know that, and he is required to test both of them anyway, every time, for as long as he works there. I sat in the truck by that fence with the heater running and I thought, all right, all right. I have been taking a man's word for 3 years. That stops today. Dee came out the next evening with a pan of scalloped potatoes and ham, which is what her mother made when somebody had died or somebody was sick. She is a good woman. Put that down before I say the rest of it. She has been the nurse at the Ellery grade school 11 years, and she has held the head of about every child in this township over a wastebasket at one time or another, and there is not a mean thing in her. She got the pan in the oven and wiped her hands and said, Dad, Garrett told me about the tax mess. He is sick about it. I said, is he? She said, he has been on the phone about it for weeks. I said, since December. And she stopped with the towel in her hands, because Dee has known me a long time, and she knows what I sound like when I am putting a meter on something. She said, Dad? I said, I am asking a question, honey, not accusing. When did you first hear about the taxes? And she said, Tuesday, 2 days before. Her husband had been fighting the county since December and had told his wife on Tuesday. She did not hear it. Understand that part, because I expect a good many of you have somebody in the family who did not hear it either. She said, well, he did not want to worry either one of us. She said, Dad, just sign what he needs you to sign. He does this for a living. You are making it harder. I said, what am I making harder? And she said, everything. You make everything harder. You always have. Mom used to say you would rather be right in the cold than warm and wrong. Rosalie did say that. She said it to me in 1992 in a hospital parking lot, and I have never forgotten it, and I never told anybody. And I sat in my kitchen and listened to my daughter hand it back to me, and I understood that they had been talking about me. The letter came 9 days later. It was on the stationery of a law office in Springfield, and it was 2 paragraphs, and it was very polite. It said that counsel had been consulted regarding the affairs of Wendell J. Prather. It said that in the event the matter of the delinquent parcel could not be resolved cooperatively, the family was prepared to consider a petition in the circuit court for appointment of a guardian of the estate. That is the Illinois word. Some states say conservator. Illinois says guardian. Guardian of the person, if they mean your body. Guardian of the estate, if they mean your money. It is all in the probate act, and it is heard in the circuit court. And it starts with a form the court gives you, where a physician writes down what he thinks of your mind. And it said, in that same polite tone, that counsel understood Mr. Prather resides alone at a rural address, no longer drives after dark, and has recently permitted a substantial tax delinquency to accrue on his homestead. Every fact in that sentence was true. I sat with that letter at the kitchen table for a long while. It was the middle of April by then, 57 days to the 12th of June. You want to know what a letter like that does to a man. It does not make you angry, not at first. It makes you inventory yourself. I know what day it is. I know the balance in my accounts within $40. I renewed my license in person in 2024 and read the second line. I drove a bucket truck 19 hours through the ice storm of '98. I have a spiral notebook in the drawer under this telephone, where I write down every single thing I have verified with my own hands since 1971, and I stopped, and I got up and I opened the drawer under the telephone. That notebook is not for the gloves alone. Habits do not stay in their lane. Anything I check goes in it. One line. Date first. Furnace flue. Well cap. Water heater relief valve. Tire pressures the morning of a trip. I went back 3 years, page by page, to the November after Rosalie died. The November that came a few weeks after I sat in this kitchen and said all right to a man across the table. And there it was, in pencil, in my own hand. November 6th. Vandiver. Collector's office. Parcel paid current. Both installments. Print out in the file box. I, Chastain. I had gone. Of course I had gone. It was the first year in 44 that I had not paid it myself, and I had not been able to sleep on it, so I had driven 22 miles up there to lay eyes on a piece of paper, and Ividel Chastain had run it off and stamped it and initialed it and handed it to me, and I had written it in the book and put the paper in the file box and never thought about it again, which meant something that took me a minute to see. That year was paid. That first year, both halves, paid, out of my account, with my money. The trouble did not start when Garrett took the paperwork. It started the year after. Somebody had made a decision, and I still had the paper that proved when. I was at the collector's counter at 8 o'clock the next morning with the printout in a grocery sack because it was the only thing in the house that would keep it flat. Ivadel looked at it a long time. Then she turned it over and looked at the back, which is a thing only somebody who works with paper does. She said, "That is my initial," she said, "and that is our stamp, and that is the machine we retired in March of the following year, so nobody can tell you this came out of a printer in somebody's kitchen." Then she said, "Sit down over there, Wendell, and let me teach you the tax sale, because you are going to need to know it, and everybody learns it too late. There is a wooden bench along the wall under the window, with the radiator under it. I sat on it like a man at the doctor, and Ivadel Chastain stood at the end of the counter with her arms folded and told me how a person in this state loses a house that is paid for. She said, "First thing you get out of your head is that the county is coming after you. The county does not want your land. It wants the money on the date it is due, because the school district and the fire district and the library have already spent it. So if you do not pay, the county does not sue you and does not foreclose. It puts your parcel in the annual sale, and at that sale a room full of buyers bid on your bill." And she said, "Here is the part that turns people around. Nobody bids the price up at that sale. They bid the penalty down. The penalty starts at 18% for each 6-month period, and the man willing to take the least percentage gets your certificate. On a house in town with a bank behind it, the bidding runs down to a fraction of 1%, because they know the mortgage company will redeem inside a week, and they are just parking money." And then she said, "But on a place like yours, 11 acres, no mortgage, an old man on it alone, nobody bids it down. Yours went at 18%. Whoever bid it was not parking money." I said, "They were buying the ground," she said. "They were buying a chance at the ground. That is all a certificate is. Then you have got your period to redeem. Pay the buyer back what he laid out, plus his penalty, plus his costs, plus any later installments he paid to protect himself, and the certificate is waste paper." And she said, "But nobody comes in here to redeem, Wendell. Do you know why? Because they never find out. The bill goes to an address, and the delinquent notice goes to an address, and the certified letter goes to an address, and the publication goes in the back of the Vandiver paper in type you would need a magnifying glass for, and if the address is wrong, all 4 of those things happen perfectly and nobody has broken a single rule." She said, "The only piece of it that does not care about the address is the one that came to your porch." I said, "The deputy." She said, "The deputy. The law says the buyer has to serve the occupant of the property in person, by the sheriff, not less than 3 months, and not more than 6 months, before the redemption runs out. Somebody has to walk up on the ground and hand it to whoever is standing on it." She said, "That is the whole reason you are sitting on my bench instead of finding out in July. I want to stop and say that plainly, because it is the most useful thing in this entire story. Every other piece of the machine that was supposed to warn me was a piece of mail, and mail goes wherever a form says. One piece of it required a human being to walk up on the ground and put a paper in the hand of whoever answered the door. That is the one that worked. That is the only one that worked. You cannot redirect a man's feet with a change of address card." Then I asked her for the form. She went back into the file room, and I sat on the radiator bench and looked at the ceiling of the Pettibone County Courthouse, which is pressed tin and has been painted so many times you cannot make out the pattern anymore except in a raking light. She came back with a folder and set it on the counter, and she said, "I have to charge you $1 a page." I said, "Ivadel." She said, "I have to charge you $1 a page, Wendell, because it is a public record, and the fee is set by ordinance, and the day I start deciding who I charge is the day my initials on the back of your printout stop meaning anything." So I got out my billfold and paid her $4, and she wrote me a receipt, and I do not believe I have ever been happier to be charged for anything. I did not read it there. I want you to know that too. I put it under my arm, and I drove it 2 blocks to a lawyer. Nadine Kubiak has a storefront office on Locust with her name in vinyl letters on the glass and 4 chairs and a coffee table with farm magazines on it. She does closings and farm leases and deeds and the occasional estate. And the reason I went to her instead of somebody in Springfield is that she did the closing when Rosalie and I bought the 11 acres in 1979. And she was about 26 years old that day, and I remember her hands shaking on the stapler. She read the take notice and she read the printout, and she set the folder from the collector's office off to one side, unopened, which I thought was strange until she explained it. She said, Before I look at that, I want to tell you where you actually stand, because I do not want the paper in that folder changing what I tell you. She said, Wendell, you have got two separate problems, and people confuse them and lose their house doing it. Problem one is the clock. On the 12th of June, either the redemption has been made or it has not. If it has not, that petition goes in front of a judge, and the judge's job at that point is very narrow. He is not there to hear that your son-in-law did you wrong. He is there to find whether the buyer complied with the statute. People have walked into that hearing with a folder full of proof of a wrong done to them and walked out not owning their house, because the wrong they proved was not the question in front of the court. She said, problem two is the wrong itself. Who moved the mail? Who signed what? Whether anybody swore to anything that is not true. That problem is real, and it may be criminal, and it belongs to the state's attorney, and it will take a year. And then she said the sentence I have repeated to a dozen men my age since. She said, do not ever bet the roof on being right. Being right takes a year, and you have got 51 days. I said, so I redeem. She said, you redeem. You take the money out of wherever it is and you walk it into that office and you get your certificate of redemption. And then that petition is dead the minute it is filed with the clerk, and nobody can take your ground. And after that we can be angry at our leisure. I had it. That is the only lucky thing in this whole business, and I know it is luck and not virtue. I had $9,200 in a passbook account at the bank in Ellery that Rosalie opened in 1981, and neither one of us ever touched, except for the roof. $3,460.11 does not break a man who has that. There are people who do not have that. There are people to whom $1,100 of unpaid taxes is the end of everything they own, and they lose a house worth $200,000 over it. And it is legal, and it happens in this state every single year. And I did not know that until I was 78. Then I asked her my question. My question was a lineman's question, and she did not understand it at first. I said, if I redeem, does anything get tested? She said, I am sorry. I said, if I pay them, does anybody ever have to answer for the address? And she sat back and she said, no. If you redeem, they take your money, and they release the certificate, and they go on to the next parcel, and no judge ever looks at any of it, and your son-in-law keeps every license he has got, and next year he will still be the one who knows how the calendar works. I said, all right, then I am going to do both. She said, both. I said, I am going to redeem it, because you do not gamble the roof. And then, I am going to go stand up in that courtroom anyway on the day of the hearing, and put the rest of it in front of the judge, because a thing that is not tested is not safe, and I have had 3 years of thinking something was safe. She looked at me for a while. She said, Wendell, most people do one or the other. They pay and swallow it, or they hold their money and fight and lose the place. I said, most people take somebody's word for it. And she pulled the collector's folder over and put her hand flat on it and said, then let us find out what is in here. And she said, before I open it, I will tell you what to look for. When somebody files a change of mailing address in that office, the deputy who accepts it writes the identification on the back, number and expiration. It is not a law. It is an office rule Wendell Chastain put in 20-some years ago after a man's brother did something similar to him, and she has made every clerk in that office do it ever since. She said, the back of the paper is where these things die. If you are still here, hit subscribe before she opens it, because what was written on the back of that page is the only reason I am telling you this from my own kitchen table and not from a bed with a number on the footboard. She opened the folder. The form is a half sheet called a request for change of tax bill mailing address, and it is about as plain as a fishing license. Parcel number, mine. Owner name, mine. Typed. Old address, mine. New address, 118 North Kestrel Street, Suite 2, Vandiver. A line for a signature, a line for a date, and a box in the corner where the office stamps it the minute it comes in. The date on the signature line was the 14th of May of the year after Rosalie died. About 6 months after I stood at that counter and got my printout that said everything was paid, and the signature was Wendell J. Prather. I want to be honest about the signature, because in the movies a man looks at a forgery and knows it on sight. I looked at it a good while. It was not bad. It had my loop on the W, and it had the hook where my last 2 letters run together, and that hook has been the same since I was 25. Somebody had had something to study, Nadine Kubiak said. Do not look at the signature. Everybody looks at the signature, and the signature is the weakest evidence there is. And she turned the page over. On the back, in the upper right corner, in pen, in the small, careful hand of a woman who was told to do it and does it, was written the following. Received by mail. ID copy attached. Illinois driver's license. And then, the number. And then two words that ended it. Expires 03/09/2020. The 9th of March, 2020. The 9th of March is my birthday. Every license I have ever had in this state has expired on my birthday. And the one that expired on the 9th of March in 2020 had been dead in a drawer for more than 5 years on the day that form was mailed in. I renewed in person, in Vandiver, in 2024. I stood on the line on the floor and read the second row and got my picture taken with my hat off. The card in my billfold at that very moment, the one I put on Nadine Kubiak's desk and pushed across, had a different number and expired on the 9th of March, 2028. The photocopy that came in the mail with that form was of a license that had been expired for 5 years. Nadine looked at it a long time. Then she said, "A clerk should have caught that." I said, "I imagine so." She said, "That is the week of the reassessment mailing. They put temporary help on that counter for 3 weeks every spring." Somebody, 19 years old, wrote down exactly what was in front of her, exactly the way she was trained to, and never looked at the year. And that is not a conspiracy. That is a Tuesday. And then she said, "But Wendell, you understand what this means about where the copy came from." I did, because I knew where the only photocopy of that expired license in this world had been. In 2019, the co-op ran a retiree insurance recertification, and they wanted a copy of your license with the form. I made mine at the library in Ellery, on the machine by the drinking fountain, and it went in the brown folder in my file box, with all the other things that have to be copied for something. And on the Sunday, 4 months after we buried Rosalie, when a man sat at my kitchen table and said, "Let us take the paperwork off your hands," he did not take the file box. He went through it while I made coffee, and he pulled out what he called the essentials and put them in a manila folder and put the folder under his arm and carried it down my back steps. I stood at my own stove with my back turned and let him decide what the essentials were. I said that out loud in that office on Locust Street, and Nadine Kubiak wrote it down, and then she put her pen down and said, "I need to say something to you as a lawyer, and then I need to say something to you as a person who has known you since I was 26. As a lawyer," she said, "this is not sloppiness. Sloppiness does not know the date of the annual sale. Sloppiness does not have a bidder card." And then the other part. She said, "Wendell, whoever did this did not need you to die. They needed you not to know for about 18 months. That is a thing I have thought about at 4 in the morning more times than I am going to admit. My whole place, everything Rosalie and I put in the ground, was worth about $1,100 and a year and a half of me not knowing, and I was the one who had made that possible. Not with a signature. With one word at my own kitchen table. All right." Over the next 3 weeks, Nadine Kubiak pulled the rest of it, and every single piece of it was a public record that anybody in Pettibone County could have walked in and asked for, including me, at any time in the last 2 years, for $1 a page. The bidder registration for the annual tax sale is filed with the treasurer, Meridian Ledger Limited Liability Company, Springfield. Principal, T. Royce, Tandy. And on the second line, the line for a person authorized to bid and to sign on behalf of the entity, in a hand I have seen on Christmas cards, Garrett D. Vossler. The annual report on file with the Secretary of State showed the company had been organized 14 months before my parcel went delinquent. And then there was the affidavit. I did not know what an affidavit of notice was before this happened to me, and now I could recite it in my sleep. When a tax buyer wants a deed, he has to prove to the court that he told everybody the law says he had to tell. Owners, occupants, anybody with an interest. His attorney files a sworn statement with the circuit clerk listing who was notified, at what address, by what method, on what date. That affidavit was in the court file. It said the owner of record, Wendell J. Prather, had been notified by certified mail at his address of record, 118 North Kestrel Street, Suite 2, Vandiver, Illinois. Certified. Signed for. There is a green card in the file with a signature on it. And Nadine Kubiak put her finger on that green card and said, "This is the whole case, not the deed, not the signature on the address form. This," she said, "because a man can say he made a bookkeeping error. A man cannot say he accidentally signed for a certified letter addressed to his father-in-law at his own office, telling his father-in-law he was about to lose his house, and then said nothing to him for 4 months. There was one more thing in that file, and I would rather not tell you about it, and I am going to tell you anyway because I said at the start that I was going to be honest. There is a form the county requires when a change of address request is mailed in rather than brought in. It asks for a witness. One line, one signature, one date. The witness line on my form said Deanna R. Vossler. That is my daughter's handwriting. I have 30 years of birthday cards, and I did not have to think about it for 1 second. I sat in that office and looked at my little girl's name on the paper that moved my mail. And Nadine Kubiak, who is a good lawyer, said nothing at all for about a minute and let me get there myself. Because a woman who is stealing from her father does not sign her own name in her own hand on the one line nobody would have ever checked. She signed it because her husband slid it across the kitchen counter on a Tuesday night with a pen laying on top and said, "Sign right here, hun. It is for your dad's tax bill." And she did it without reading it, the way she has signed 100 things, the way I said all right without testing it. And the difference between my daughter and me on that particular day is not one single thing. On the 4th of June, I drove to Vandiver with a cashier's check. There is no ceremony to it. You stand at the marble counter and you slide it under the glass, and Ividel Chastain runs it, and the printer behind her makes a noise for about 9 seconds. And she brings you a piece of paper with a raised seal on it that says Certificate of Redemption. And she stamps it, and she initials it, and she says, "There you are." I stood there holding it. $3,460.11. And my house was mine again. And it had never for 1 minute stopped being mine. And it had been $1,140 away from belonging to a man in Springfield who has never seen it. I said, "Ividel, thank you." And she said, "Do not thank me. I have not done one thing for you that I would not do for anybody who walked in that door. And if you thank me for it, then it starts to be a favor, and it is not a favor. It is the counter." She said that, and I have not been able to shake it since. It is not a favor. It is the counter. Then I asked her when the hearing was. She looked it up on the clerk's docket, which is a screen bolted to the wall by the elevator that anybody can read. Courtroom 2, the 24th of June, 9:15 in the morning. 3 tax deed petitions on the call. And beside my parcel number, in the column where the clerk puts the time allotted, it said 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That is what it takes to hand a man's house to somebody else in this country, if nobody comes. I wrote the date in the notebook in the drawer under the telephone, and underneath it I wrote one more line, which I had not written in that book in 15 years, and which anybody who ever worked with me would have known the meaning of instantly. Test before touch. Courtroom 2 in the Pettibone County Courthouse is the small one at the end of the hall with the radiator that knocks. It seats maybe 40 people, and on the 24th of June there were 9 of us in it, and 4 of those were lawyers. I wore a clean shirt. I brought 2 things with me. One was a manila folder. The other was the canvas bag off the shelf inside my back door, with the gloves in it. And if you had asked me that morning why I carried it into a courthouse, I could not have said. I can now. The attorney for Meridian Ledger was a young man out of Springfield named Bram Dice, with 3 files under his arm and a train to catch. The first 2 petitions took about 6 minutes together. He stood, he recited, he handed up an affidavit. The judge signed the order. He sat down. Nobody appeared on either one. A house on Grand Avenue in Vandiver changed owners while I sat watching, and the woman who used to own it was not in the room, and I do not believe she knew. Judge Alma Petrick called my parcel number. Mr. Dice stood up and started in. Petition for tax deed. Certificate of purchase number such and such. Notices served in compliance with the statute. Affidavit on file. No redemption having been made. And Nadine Kubiak stood up on the other side of the aisle and said, "Good morning, Your Honor, Nadine Kubiak for the owner of record, and we have some paper." You could hear the radiator. She handed the first document to the clerk, and the clerk carried it up. It was the Certificate of Redemption, with the raised seal, dated the 4th of June, 8 days inside the clock. That was the end of the case, right there. That is all it took. Judge Petrick looked at it and looked at Mr. Dice and said, "Counsel, did your office check the redemption before this morning?" And Mr. Dice said something about the volume of parcels, and the judge said, Then Nadine Kubiak said, "Your Honor, we would ask the court to receive 3 more exhibits, not because they affect the disposition of this petition, which is moot, but because 2 of them are sworn statements filed in this court." And she handed up the affidavit of notice. And the change of address form, front and back, with the identification of a license expired 5 years written on the back in the deputy collector's hand, and the bidder registration for the annual sale with Garrett D. Vossler's name on the authorized signature line. Judge Petrick read all 3. It took about 4 minutes, and nobody said one word. 4 minutes is nothing in a chair at home. It is a very long time in a room with 9 people and a radiator. She said, "Mr. Dice, your client's affidavit states the owner was served by certified mail at his address of record." He said, "Yes, Your Honor." She said, "And who signed the return receipt?" And Bram Dice, 29 years old, who I do not believe knew one thing about any of it, looked down at the green card in his own file and was quiet a moment, and then asked the court for a short recess. He got 12 minutes. He went out in the hall and made a phone call. When he came back, he said his client would withdraw the petition and asked that the record reflect that Meridian Ledger had acted on information supplied by its authorized agent and had no knowledge of any irregularity in the address of record. Judge Petrick said the petition was withdrawn, and the redemption was of record and title stood in Wendell J. Prather. And that was my part done. And then she said one more thing, to the clerk, not to us, in the same voice she had used for everything else. She said, "The court is going to refer the affidavit of notice and the attached change of address form to the state's attorney. Let the record show the referral." That was it. 9 minutes and change on a 4-minute call. There was no shouting. Nobody stood up and pointed at anybody. The most dramatic thing that happened in that room is that a woman in a black robe used the word referral. People say they want to see somebody get what is coming to them. I had thought about it myself, out at the house, at 4 in the morning, plenty of times. Here is what it actually feels like when it arrives. It feels like a radiator knocking. Garrett was in the back row. I did not know he was there until I turned around to leave. He had come to watch a 4-minute hearing. He was sitting with his hands on his knees looking at the front of the room, and he had the look of a man who has just done the arithmetic on how many things he had put his name on. We did not speak. He got up and went out the side door onto Locust, and I went out the front, and I stood on the courthouse steps in the June sun with a canvas bag in one hand, and I finally understood why I had brought it. I had brought it because in 41 years I never once went up a pole without it, no matter how sure I was. Not once. Not when the crew said the line was dead. Not when the dispatcher said the line was dead. Not when I had watched a man throw the switch myself. I had gone up one time without testing, and it was 3 years ago, at my own kitchen table, in my sock feet. Dee came out the next morning at 7 o'clock, which is early for her, and she had not slept, and she had not put anything in the car to bring, which for my daughter is the same as showing up naked. I made coffee. The percolator was my mother's, and it takes 9 minutes, and there is no way to hurry it. And I have decided over the years that this is a feature. I put the change of address form on the table between us with the backside up first, and then I turned it over, and she saw the witness line. She said, "Oh." That is all she said for a while, and it was enough, because I have heard that particular sound out of her twice before in my life, and both times somebody was gone. Then she said, "Dad, I did not read it." I said, "I know it." She said, "That is worse." And I said, "No, honey. It is exactly the same. It is precisely the same thing I did at this table 3 years ago and you did at yours 2 years ago, and the only difference between us is which one of us got asked first." She cried some. I let her. There is a thing men my age do where we start trying to fix the crying, and I did not do it, and that is one of about 4 things in this whole business I would do the same way again. Then she asked me the question everybody asks sooner or later. What does she do now? And I said, read the next one. That is all I have got. Read the next one. Every paper anybody ever slides across a counter at you with a pen laying on top of it. You cannot go back and fix the ones behind you. And being sorry about those is not worth anything to anybody. Read the next one. Here is how it came out. And it is less than you would want and more than I expected. Garrett surrendered his appraiser license in the fall rather than sit through the board hearing. The state's attorney took 14 months, and it ended in a plea to a single count, and there was restitution, and there was probation, and there was no prison, and I know some of you are going to be unhappy about that. I wrote one letter in that whole proceeding. It was one page, and I sent it to the state's attorney's office. And what it said was that whatever the court decided, I wanted it noted that the man's wife and his 2 children live in this county and buy their groceries in this county, and that his sentence would be served by them too, in the checkout line, for a long time. I did not ask for mercy for him. I have not got that in me, and I am not going to pretend I do. I asked for the court to know who else was standing on the ground. He lives in Effingham now and sells commercial insurance. Dee stayed, and I am not going to talk about that, because it is hers and not mine, and people my age have a bad habit of narrating their children's marriages. He has never said the word sorry to me. He started out that direction one time in a parking lot in October and did not arrive. I told him the door was not locked. That is as far as it has gotten, and I will not dress it up for you and pretend otherwise. Now, let me give you the 4 things, and then I am going to tell you about November. I am no lawyer, and I will not pretend to tell you the law where you live, because it is different in every state, and even the words are different. Buy 1 hour from an attorney in your own county. It costs less than you think, and it is the cheapest hour you will ever spend. But here is what I did not know at 78 years old, and I want you to know it tonight. 1. A house that is paid for is not safe. It is unmortgaged, which is a different thing. The tax bill outranks every deed you ever signed, and in a lot of places somebody can buy that bill for a few $100s and start a clock on your ground. 2. Whoever gets the mail runs the clock. Every warning the system sends is a piece of paper going to whatever address a form says. Change the address, and every one of those warnings arrives perfectly, on time, to the wrong man, and nobody has broken a rule. 3. Once a year, go stand at the counter yourself, not a phone call, not a website. Walk into the county building where they take the money, give them your parcel number, and ask them to print you a piece of paper that says it is paid, and put it in your hand. It takes 11 minutes. Then write the date down somewhere. 4. When somebody you love offers to carry the paperwork for you, that is usually a kindness. Let them help. But you keep one thing. You keep the address. Everything can go through them, and the mail still comes to your box. Nobody who is helping you honestly will mind that for 1 second, and the reaction you get when you ask for it will tell you everything you need to know. I go in the first week of November. Wendell Chastain retired last year, and there is a young woman at the counter named Bettina, and she thinks I am a nuisance, and she prints it and stamps it and hands it to me, and I say thank you, and she says it is not a favor, it is the counter, because Ivadel trained her. I take 3 people with me now. Purvis Rimal from the trailer court, who is 81. Elna Truax, who taught my daughter the 3rd grade. And Webb Bexley, my foreman for 19 years, who cannot get into a truck by himself anymore. All 4 of us stand in that line, and each of us gets our own piece of paper and looks at it with our own eyes. And then we eat lunch at the counter at the Redbird, and it takes the whole morning and I would not trade it. And when I get home, I open the drawer under the telephone, and I write 1 line in a spiral notebook. Date, parcel, paid current, my own eyes. The gloves still go to Decatur 4 times a year. $26 in change. They come back with the date stamped inside the cuff, and I look at it before I put them on, and I am an old man who has not been up a pole since 2011 and is never going up another one. But I look at the date, because a dead wire and a live wire hang in the same gray sky, and there is nothing on either one of them that will ever tell you which is which. And a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon does not look one bit different from any other kitchen table in the world. You test it, or you take somebody's word for it. I took a man's word for it one time, in my own house, with my hands in the sink, and it cost me $1,140 and 3 years of not knowing, and a son-in-law, and a piece of my daughter. I am still working on getting back. The paper is right here in the drawer. It has got yesterday's date on it, in pencil, in my hand. Go get yours.